I'd like to introduce Dr. Sara Grafenauer, who is a newly appointed General Manager for the Grains, Legumes and Nutrition Council. Sara is a PhD qualified accredited practicing dietitian.
So the most hated woman in the room.
So we're going to bring in a debate now with experiences in health, food industry and tertiary education. Sara is going to provide us with some insight into how the GLNC are promoting health benefits of their produce along that supply chain. And I'm hoping that's something, a little bit of it, but Sara will tell us more.
And I get to rebut the previous three speakers. I think it's fabulous to be here. I started my career as a dietitian out in Parkes and Bathurst, so central west New South Wales. So it was a fabulous time of my life to get to know farmers and their health situation and live amongst that agricultural industry. It was great. I think it's fabulous to work in food. I've worked that angle in my career because it always changes, and I think the thing that you've heard today is there's an amazing array of research that's happening. Okay, and that's why we always sound like we're changing our minds. And no, David, I've never cut anyone back totally on meat, so you are safe. But I think today the thing that stood out for me as a dietitian coming in here is that it's not just about food, it's about quality of our food. And I think as graduates you need to be walking out of here striving to achieve a really high quality food supply. Because for me, nutrition doesn't work unless it tastes good. And we've had a consumer perspective there, and we see that consumers are driven by more than just nutrition and health. And while evidence is really important in terms of, from my professional point of view, because I guess we'd have pork on our fork if we didn't have that evidence around lamb. And so I think it's really important to respect that nutrition is really complex. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about nutrition. But I'm not going to show many graphs. I think we've seen enough for today. It's going to be a little bit more holistic. I think from our first speaker, one of the things that we can really take away is that we could get our beef right, but my research is around dietary patterns, and so the whole diet needs to be good. So if you're chugging down lots of grog, boys, and the girls have already told me about you, then that's going to destroy things to a certain point of view, okay? Similarly, if you're not consuming wise choices throughout the day, the meat in the diet or the quality of carbohydrate is also not going to matter. So let's have a little bit of a drive here. So I'm from Grains and Legumes Nutrition Council, and I've been in the job 6 weeks, so this is flying by the seat of your pants. We link the entire grains and legume industry value chain. So we work with growers, research organisations, the millers, food manufacturers, so I'll show you the manufacturers that we interact with as contributors to our organisation, retailers, so the bigwigs, teaching them about how to innovate in various grain and legume categories, the government and also consumers. So that's a fairly big focus for us. We've got 4 platforms that we work from. So our strategic plan is driven around evidence. We do some great research around market insights. We've just had a big project in field this year in March, and we can tell you that the consumption of grains has now plateaued. So thanks to my very good friend, and I hope you know who I'm talking about, Pete Evans, that wicked celebrity chef, that was all things paleo and liver formulas for babies. Here's my arch enemy. We're the same age, actually. So next time you take a good look at Pete, look past those baby blue eyes to see his beautiful complexion. He hasn't been using sun cream. Or drinking water, apparently, because it has fluoride in it. Industry engagement, there's a lot of work going on there, and community engagement. So we're very active on social media. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook for updates around the grain industry and grain and legume industry and what we're doing there. We drive a whole lot of research, in fact, in terms of grains and legumes. And I'll touch on some of those things as we go through today. So what are core grain foods? So we get to see a part of the plate diagram that we haven't seen yet today, that of those grainy carbohydrate foods, the much maligned food group by our friend Pete Evans. But we have a large bowel in there, people. And we might be anatomically driven to consume meat, but that bowel is massive, right? So we need to stuff it full of goodness, and grains and legumes are a great way of doing that. Jumpy with the controller. So the Australian Dietary Guidelines have, enjoy grain, cereal foods, mostly whole grain. And I'll tell you why that statement is a bit of a problem. It's a bit loose. It doesn't really tell people how much whole grain they need to consume. But we know that Australians aren't eating enough of these foods currently. And one of the problems is that breakfast cereals and breads are a major food source for food fortification. So we pop a little bit of that very valuable iron into breakfast cereal, and one of the most recent fortifications of bread is around folate to protect women in pregnancy and babies, their offspring, from neural tube defects, which is really bad, and also iodine, because we were found to be iodine deplete. Back in 1990, we stopped washing big milk trucks out with an iodine-based sanitizer, and so our population has gradually become depleted in iodine, and so now it's fortified through your mainstream breads. Not organic varieties though. So although a lot of us are consuming from the cereals and cereal products group, we're not actually getting enough of those core grain foods. So breakfast cereals, breads, pasta and rice. And yes, white varieties are okay. You're not getting as much fibre or as much whole grain from those choices, but they're absolutely fine to consume in your meals daily. What I'll do now is just a little focus on breakfast cereals, and then we'll look at bread, and then we'll look at noodles and pasta. So breakfast cereals actually are a really big carrier of nutrients in our diet. Not so much if you're eating porridge oats, because they tend not to be fortified if you're consuming the plain variety. But if you're consuming a flaked breakfast cereal or a porridge oat that is in a flavour type sachet format, you're getting a whole lot of nutrients along with your serve of breakfast cereal. And most people are still consuming these in the morning. I guess Pete Evans got on his bandwagon because the Australian population has been gaining weight, and that is a problem for us because it's driving a lot of health-related diseases. We've talked a lot about cardiovascular disease, but diabetes is the other big one. And when I first started in practice over 20 years ago, my patients were 70-year-olds. They were older, okay? Now, it isn't uncommon for me to get a 20-year-old, particularly bloke, that has gone from puppy fat baby to puppy fat teenager to puppy fat 20-year-old. And so it's a really important thing to look after your health and your nutrition. Okay. And we know from research that people who regularly eat breakfast and breakfast cereal have a healthier weight. They are less likely to develop cardiovascular disease and this wicked type 2 diabetes. So in terms of breakfast cereal, what's in them? Are they really that bad? Well, there are some that are quite refined, the kid type breakfast cereals, and they do contain some sugar. But on the whole, a lot of our breakfast cereals are actually a really good source of protein. Often Australians are quite ignorant that grains contain protein, just like meat. Okay? A lot of them are a source of fibre, source of whole grain. They're actually low in sodium, and breakfast cereal themselves contribute very little actual salt to the Australian diet. And most of them are lower in sugar. And even if they're not, say you buy a porridge oat and make it up, most consumers will need to add something to that anyway. And so what manufacturers have done is added an amount that makes them palatable. And there's extreme pressure on this food category to be compliant with the health star ratings. You might have seen those on pack. And so this industry is under a lot of pressure to reformulate and to make products better. So read your packaging when you're going around making your choice. In terms of bread, breads are the leading source of dietary fibre in our diet. So if you're avoiding them, you're not getting that dietary fibre that's so good for our bowel. Like I said, we've got a damn big bowel in there and it needs bulk going through it. Okay, I'm not going to give you a lesson on fibre, but suffice to say, some of it works like a big broom through your bowel, that dietary fibre, the real fibrous sort of fibre that's there, and then there's soluble fibre that forms like a gel through your bowel, mopping up cholesterol particles and other things as it moves through. And so bread is a really important source. And the thing that we're finding here is the bread industry is responding to consumer demands. They're producing new varieties of bread, flatbreads, tortillas, new styles that can go in your toaster. These are actually innovations that consumers are clearly loving because we're seeing consumption going up. The other thing that's a real trend in that bread area is the stone ground and sourdough type market, the cafe style breads. And so be aware that they're also great sources of carbohydrate and fibre and whole grain in your diet. We know from looking at dietary patterns for over 30 years and more now that bread is actually a healthful food to have within your diet, and again linked with lower coronary heart disease and cancer. So what about bread? What do we find there? Because of course there's that putty white bread, isn't there? Even putty white bread does contain some fibre, and there's innovations with added fibre white breads, but most of the fibre that's in bread is actually naturally there. It's not added or manipulated by the manufacturers. Most of them, a lot are at least a source of whole grain, many are a source of protein and a source of fibre. The majority of loaf breads are low in sugar. For some reason, consumers think that sugar is added in a big way to bread. Well, you need a certain amount of sugar to feed the yeast in beginning of bread making, but it's not something that's added to make bread sweet. Breads do contain salt in the same way that sugar is added for the yeast. Salt is added in preparing bread, and you would know that if you cook bread yourselves at home in a bread maker or in an oven of some sort. And bread, though, contributes about 21% of sodium in the Australian diets. There are other foods that are contributing far more to our salt intake. And we're known for eating about 35% of our energy from non-core foods. So these are treat type foods, chips, pastries, it baffles me to even list off a whole range of foods, biscuits, cakes, lollies, other confectionery. And so we're eating quite an amount of energy from these non-core foods. Bread is not really the target we're looking for. When we're looking at rice, pasta, noodles and couscous, it's a similar sort of story. So I won't labour the point, but low in sugar, low in sodium, source of fibre, all good stuff. And enjoyable too. I think that's the thing, that you need to be able to construct meals that are filling, satisfying and are enjoyable. And carbohydrates are a great way of carrying flavours through your meal. Let's look at a whole grain. Cute little wheat grain in this case. So we have 3 different layers there. What happens in processing is those outer layers, so number 1 and 2, the bran and the endosperm, are stripped away. And we know that it's the whole grain that's supplying a whole range of nutrients. So while I said to you white rice, white pasta, all fine, looking for whole grain products is actually really important and very protective for health. And we don't know if it's just the fact that we're putting whole grain back into foods that's actually helping with studies that are evolving in this area. It's the whole grain working together. It's similar to sort of the research that's happening around almonds, looking at the whole almond. It's not just the protein in the almond or the antioxidants that might be there. It's all these factors working together. Foods are literally magic if we leave them alone a little bit more. Oh, it hasn't come out very well, but we know that there are about 32 bioactive ingredients in whole grains that support health. So these foods are working right through the body, similar to meat foods and legumes and dairy and fruit and vegetables. There are a myriad of components in foods that we don't understand yet. So for someone to come out and say, this is the best way to eat, you should only eat paleo, is actually very wrong. There are many healthy cultures around the world. Mediterranean style of eating is another one that's very well researched. Even within the Mediterranean though, there are different ways of eating. There is no single answer. And I think if you want to get your health sorted out, dare I say, see an accredited practicing dietitian. If you want advice around where you should be at your particular age, it's the best way to get things sorted. You need to be happy with your health professional though, and make sure that you explain where you're coming from, and that's how, you know, you build a relationship and get the right advice. So this is where the magic happens. Whole grains, 3 serves, people eating 3 serves each day. Remember I said to you the Australian Dietary Guidelines say mostly whole grain? Well, we know from a range of research over the last 20 to 30 years that it's actually 3 serves of whole grain foods each day that is going to help reduce risk of disease, help control weight, help you remain healthier and avoid an early death. So 1 piece of whole grain bread or a bowl of whole grain breakfast cereal is about a 16 gram serve. We're aiming for 48 grams over the day. It's not as though you're going to calculate it, so just try and get 3 serves of whole grain foods in your diet each day. This is a little bit about legumes. I was actually speaking to someone in the break. What are legumes? I think consumers are confused. We're actually going to do some research in this area. I think people identify when they eat kidney beans and they eat chickpeas or they have hummus, but they don't necessarily stand in the supermarket aisle and go, oh, I'm in legume land. This is not the breakfast style. They don't understand legumes, and I think we need to dig deeper and find out a little bit more about this food group. Now, if you think meat's magic and grains are wonderful, this is really the undersold food group in terms of the healthy diet pyramid. So what am I talking about here? It's fresh beans, fresh peas, beans, pulses, dried beans, chickpeas, lentils, soybeans, peanuts. We've actually been set a target in Australia. To reach what is recommended, we need to increase pulse consumption by 470%. That's massive. We need more people putting legumes into their meals, not having them instead of meat, but complementing their meat dish with a side of perhaps something with a legume in it. No, as long as it's not tofu, all right. Increase pulse production by 2020. And we're also looking at the export market and domestic trade of pulses. So it's a growth. There's some focus and some growth around this. These are literally miracle beans. They're low GI, so they're long, slow release of their carbohydrate, protein for good, strong muscles, B vitamins, magnesium, iron, zinc, fibre. They're low in saturated fat, gluten-free. They complement meat. Yeah? I'm doing well on that diplomacy side, aren't I? All right. We know that they're really protective in terms of what they do for you in terms of disease. And every 20 gram increase in daily legume intake can reduce risk of death. Studies in nutrition are either about disease or death. We know that certain parts of the world, called blue zones, where people live less stressful and more harmonious lives, and they also eat very well, live much longer. So we're talking about living closer to 100 years of age. And they tend to consume legumes at least twice a week. So we also need firmer guidance around legume consumption in the Australian Dietary Guidelines. I'll just show you a little bit about the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating. So this is the complete plate. Meat gets a fair chunk of that. It's about meeting adequacy in terms of your iron and your zinc requirements, and making a beautiful meal, I think. Again, that taste thing needs to come in. So the Australian Dietary Guidelines recommend enjoying grain, cereal foods, mostly whole grain. It's around about 6 serves a day, and I've told you around 3 to 4 from whole grain varieties. This is how we measure it: a slice of bread, half a cup of cooked rice, 2/3 of a cup of cereal, or half a cup of cooked pasta. Most ladies, small ladies, will have a bowl of breakfast cereal and then a couple of slices of bread for lunch and a cup of cooked pasta at night. That gets you around that 5 mark. Okay, just as an example there. Here's your legumes. They're shown in 2 different parts of the dietary guidelines on the Eat Well plate. They're shown in the vegetable section. We can't really decide where to put them because of their range of nutrients. And also over here in the meat section, because they are, for some people, a replacement for meat, so in vegetarian or vegan eating, but they also contain substantial amount of protein. So we put them in both sides of the healthy eating plate, and also to help increase consumption. A serve of legumes, though, is about half a cup. So half a cup of your baked beans or your kidney beans in a salad or in a beef mince dish. How many times? Or, well, on the side of your beautiful lamb. Okay, so about half a cup of pulses at least twice a week. Okay, so how do we work with industry? And how do we actually get this happening so more of the fabulous grains that are produced by farmers go into the food supply? We've got a code of practice for whole grain. Now, David mentioned the Food Authority, FSANZ. They guide food manufacturers as to claims around fat and sugar and salt, but there's actually nothing existing around whole grain. And so grains and legumes actually do that regulation for the government, for FSANZ. The challenge is a lot of people are very confused about whole grain foods. They even think that brown sugar is a source of whole grain, okay? I'm surprised because I would have thought they'd think, oh, well, meat's fibrous, that's got to be a whole grain, but it's not. So we have a code of practice for whole grain ingredient content claims, and this is driving the industry to renovate products, to innovate products, to add more whole grain to their products. So there's a whole lot of registered users, over 25 companies or businesses that are registered with us to help do this, and now over 500 products in the food supply. But what does that really look like? Since we've done this in June 2013, it means that over 400 Olympic swimming pools of whole grain have been added to the food supply in Australia. So over 100,000 tonne. So it's a really big public health initiative, because if we can reduce disease, and we're talking if people are hitting that target of 3 serves each day, we're reducing diseases by about 30% each. That's a fantastic public health initiative. All right, this is the final part of my presentation. I'm just going to touch on a few consumer trends out there so you can start to think about how you could maybe leverage some of these. There are some really distinct trends for 2017 out in the marketplace. Digestive wellness is one of them. Plant-based. Snackification, where there's a trend, particularly among millennials, to move away from set meal times, that 3 set meal times, to more snacking, and also good carbs and bad carbs. Had to mention that one because of my friend Pete Evans. These trends they don't stay still though, and they're not just around for this year. You would have heard about trends around digestive wellness really picking up over the years. We're looking at probiotics, so the healthy bugs that are in the food supply, prebiotics, the fibre additives that are also very helpful for the gut and helping to protect the body against disease. Sometimes people think that the brain is the master controller of the human body. But I can tell you, if your bowel fails, you're dead. If it gets backed up, that's end of story. And many Australians are very constipated, bloated, talking about all this sort of thing. But just because gluten rhymes with Putin, and he's been mentioned today, doesn't mean that it's bad, okay? And we have seen a trend now, particularly since there's been a big Harvard study published earlier in the year, hopefully moving away from that avoidance of gluten-containing foods, because it's really important that we include these wholesome whole grain foods in our diet and avoiding them for no proper reason. So if you don't have celiac disease or one of the related conditions, is unnecessary. The other one is around plant-based protein, and we've seen a very big trend in terms of sales around this concept, really getting grains, legumes, nuts, pulses, seeds as alternative sources of protein into the diet. And the other thing that I've personally seen is people diversifying their grains. So there was a time when I would take diet histories from people where they would eat a wheatie breakfast cereal, a wheatie bread for lunch, and then perhaps pasta for dinner. Wheat, too much wheat. We've got to get other grains in there and really diversify. And people are loving recipes and recipe ideas, how we cook these new grains or these old grains that are new again. So I just thought I'd show you some of the products that are out on the market. San Remo is doing a pulse pasta. It is gluten-free. You do need to be careful how you cook it. Similar to gluten-free type pasta products, you've got to keep testing it to make sure it's just al dente. There's muesli bar choices with chickpeas in them, a roasted split chickpea up there. Chickpeas seem to be common on this slide, but little salad packs, pre-packed type things from Edgel that you just zhuzh up in the microwave. A variety of things emerging and coming onto the market, showing real innovation in these areas. Again, this area of snackification, so it's quite relevant to the group in this room because we are seeing younger people moving away from those set meal times to getting their nutrition from smaller meals and snacks, and you need to be careful that they're still quite nutritious. And so there's a range of things happening, products emerging that really will still help you achieve your protein intake, to build strong muscles, boys, to trim down, ladies, because isn't that what we're doing? We're trying to do the same thing with our diet, but to achieve two totally different ends of the spectrum. So there's a whole variety of products out there. Quinoa, using different grains, and ancient grains is something that has come up as a bit of a flavour of the month thing too over the last couple of years. So good carbs, bad carbs. Like I said when I began, the story here around nutrition is about getting quality. And so it's not just about chowing down on something that's large and bulky. It's about choosing food carefully and really thoughtful choices about what you put inside your body. And there's been themes like that throughout today where we've touched on organic, touched on beautiful lamb cuts and particularly choice cuts of meat. I heard over and over again what I like to eat is when we go out, we like to eat something in particular, something that's really good. It's not just about this, it's about the taste and the flavour. And so this is also true here. It's not just about looking at the nutrients and the nutrition. These foods and the innovation that's happening in this carbohydrate land need to be tasting good. And we've seen particular growth in these sort of categories, these flatbreads, wraps, things, people looking for lighter eating styles. So the question is, I think the big question of the day is, by working in this area of agriculture, Can you shape consumer trends? Have you got ideas? Can you drive the next ideas around the foods that are produced in Australia to really capture consumers and excite them to eat in a healthier way? And that's it. Thank you. Is that all right?
Thank you, Sarah. That was a very good question to end on. And is there open up for a couple of questions? Steve? No, well, yeah, probably let's do a mic or you stand up there.
All right. I talked to Sarah earlier. She has the Australian equivalent of the education my wife has, so she's totally on the same page as my wife. But the discussion, and by the way, great talk. I do eat my produce too, and grains. One of the things that happened in the United States about 50 years ago is the dietary guidelines said, stop eating meat because it has saturated fat. And over that 50-year period, and this is a discussion I had with my wife, and I always lose because I always say, yes, dear. But, yeah. Over that 50-year period, the incidence of cardiovascular disease and obesity has skyrocketed. And she says, well, you know, simple sugars versus complex carbs. How do you get around making advice to eat more carbohydrates without duplicating the train wreck in the United States, which people just got fatter and less healthy?
If people were eating our dietary guidelines, they would not be in the shape they're in. Yeah, and so the other thing that the Americans did that we didn't do is they really pushed a cholesterol angle through their dietary guidelines, so cholesterol in foods, which we didn't do. So look, in terms of meat, and I'll be frank, it's about your palm-sized serve, right? Like that's what we talk about. That's what you have on your plate, you know? It's about, you know, so if you've got a big palm, you're lucky, aren't you? So the dietary guidelines recommend 3 red meat meals a week. I'm not going to say which one, meat and livestock, gets more money from beef than lamb, but the lamb ads are very good. So it's about mixing it up, you know. Personally, if you came to see me, I would be trying to get a vegetarian meal in there and a fish meal within the week, so not lamb 5 days and 2 days for beef. There's a bit of competition if you're talking to me, but we do eat a lot of meat. And Matt Evans did a program showing the amount of meat that Australians consume. Obviously, some of us are eating a lot more than others. The chicken program was also a big eye-opener. So, I mean, Google it. I'm not sure which channel it was on, but it was quite astounding. And I think the thing that I'm hearing today, and I just want to emphasise it again, is its quality of food choice. And so even when you're shopping for your bit of pink in plastic, as it's been referred to, I think, by Jamie Oliver, choose wisely. Choose nice foods for yourself. Respect that your body is going to take a look at what you're eating and either, you know, give you a tick for that or a big fail. So just to make sure I answer your question properly, when we've looked at studies where there's higher protein and versus higher carbohydrate over 12 months, there's no difference in weight control for equivalent. So it actually, the mix of nutrients in your diet, if we do it within a study, higher carb versus higher protein, is probably not going to matter over 12 months. Interestingly, I've just read a paper looking at whole grains and people that eat more whole grains. So it was a defined clinical trial showing and calculating that if you eat those whole grains that we're recommending, it's going to help with about 2.5 kilo weight loss over a year with doing nothing different. I can get you that paper. We should network a bit. Yeah. So it's about quality. And 6 serves is actually not a huge amount in terms of what we're actually getting people to eat through the dietary guidelines. So the dietary guidelines are based on about 55,000 studies. It's massive. And we do reflect on what other countries are doing and things like that. But yeah, it's discretionary foods that is our problem. And alcohol.
Yeah, Sarah, this is probably to the whole panel too, and thank you for your presentations, but in all the talks today, one thing that hasn't been raised about this whole thing is price, and the importance of price versus quality, and the ability for consumers, especially the person who shops locally and with a mortgage, and they don't all live in Fitzroy and have skinny lattes and have doctors and nurses, to actually obtain the value or the nutritional values of the products you are talking about, because let's be honest, beef and lamb are not cheap, and some of these other products are not cheap. How do we actually tackle that concept versus being a producer? I'm quite enjoying selling lamb for $120, $150 a head, whatever I can get. I don't want to see that fall.
So economics are considered when the dietary guidelines are put together and that meal plan modelling, and I think that's probably why we're looking at that palm-sized piece of meat. Yeah, and I mean, I know, and this is where the milk being double the price for A2. We've got a question. I mean, particularly as you said that there's no difference in the manufacturing. I don't know. You've got to weigh those things up, and I think in consultation with someone, you would need to do that. Absolutely.
Well, my daughter's a millennial. She's 26 years old, and everything we've heard about A2 milk or organic foods is an issue that's raised from someone who has a lot of discretionary money. People who aren't worried just about protein source, but now they're worried about source of origin and organic. And so as people are more affluent and have more discretionary money, then they get to make decisions about whether it's organic, and because they're willing to pay more. For developing countries, where like when I first went to Korea, it was still a developing country, they ate pieces and parts of the animal. They just wanted protein. China's still the same way. So part of the fight that we have in getting agricultural products accepted is because we are an affluent society and have raised up a bunch of millennials who are educated and want to know, can afford to be more discretionary in what they purchase. If the working class just trying to get food on the table, they're the ones I think we need to target for health, because those are the ones who are becoming more obese and having type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease. They just want food. So the economics
Legumes.
come into it.
Legumes.
I'll block up the super system.
Well, they might. They might.
Thanks for that, Professor, because my question's sort of in the same direction. Is the national policy on food targeting the right place?
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it?
Personally, I'm from Zimbabwe. A lot of the grains I used to have at home, I can't find them here. So
Yeah.
does the national policy have a base standard for the amount of fiber in our wheat varieties, or in our barley? Do we have the right nutrition standard or level, right from production? Because of the discretionary part of it, I choose what I want to eat, versus when I choose what I want to eat, does it actually have what I need?
In it. I mean, the thing that we have in place is the Food Authority, and they do a whole lot of checking of food in its raw form, making sure that it is safe and that an orange has, 60 milligrams of vitamin C, and that, so there should be the various checks done on various other crops. So there are other people that are actually looking at nutrients in raw produce that want to comment on that.
I'll make a general comment. I would say that plant breeders, or barley breeders, let's say, wouldn't think about the soluble fibre that's very valuable in barley.
It's fantastic.
They probably want to try and reduce it if anything. So it's a negative for animal nutrition, a positive for human nutrition. So it's a mixed phenomenon. I don't know what it does for beer, but probably not so flash in beer either. So if you drink
gluey.
barley beer, you will have much more flavours than if you drink rice-based beer.
Yeah.
So I doubt whether the plant breeders for barley are actually thinking with their human nutrition hat on. They would think with a beer maker's hat on. I'd imagine a wheat breeder would think with a gluten, bread making hat on, but not about increasing the beta-glucans or whatever.
Yeah.
So I suspect the answer is no. No, I'm not a barley breeder or a wheat breeder.
Yeah.
But I reckon I might be right.
It's tricky. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there's a bit of bucket chemistry going on.
So you can see how you've certainly starting to open up Pandora's box here with all these questions. I think, have you got something else to say, Matt, you wanted to say? Do you want to grab the mic and talk in that for a second? Or up here at the microphone?
I was just wondering about, we touched on fibre there for the first time, and I suppose I've been watching a bit of TV, and I think it was the SBS, Michael Mosley, and talking now about bacteria in our gut.
Do you really want me to go there?
Yeah, the poo milkshake? No. But I was just thinking, in balance to more, I was sort of thinking our generation, and everything's probably somebody else's fault, and it's not just eating all the food that's making us obese or cardiovascular disease, but how much do our own genetics and how much our own gut flora contribute to probably the diseases we face, irrespective of what we've heard today from all the different types of good foods that we're putting into our body. Is there a certain end point that if we've got this genotype, this is what we're going to end up with no matter what we put into our...
We're genetically very similar, very similar. The thing that is going on in the bowel, and I don't know whether he touched on it because I didn't actually see that, but as I said, 35% of our energy is coming from discretionary, rubbish, junk food. So it doesn't matter if your meat's fabulous, if you've backed that up with a donut and a thing of Coke, because it's not going to do anything for you. So I think, and we all want to treat ourselves. I would suggest hugs instead of treat foods. I think we all need less social and more hugging in general. I sometimes prescribe hugs because, as humans, we've become a little bit distant. It's very easy to rush off. We've got to be, it's not just about magic ingredients in new foods and innovation in the market. It's just your everyday eating. It's your everyday enjoyment of food and getting your fruit and veggies in. We know that most kids, if we didn't count potatoes in the last National Nutrition Survey, most kids would be getting no vegetables. Yeah? We're drinking too much alcohol. Too much, way too much. It's the elephant in the room, folks.
All right, last question.
Oh, we can talk later.
You have to talk in the mic.
That's right. I guess I was just going to ask, one of the things throughout all this, there's been so much different information given out on diet for the last 50 years. There's a lot of this stuff, I guess, counter to what we've heard in the past. How do we know it right now, I guess?
Eat more vegetables. Eat more fruit. Make sure you get 5 serves of veggies every day, 2 serves of fruit. That has not changed. Grainy foods, getting, grains in your diet, setting up your meal plate, sitting down and eating in a nice environment with your family, or hopefully with someone else at least. Turning off the telly, having that social meal time. Starting the day with a breakfast, drinking water. It's the best thing for you. Make sure you get your 3 serves of dairy. It's 2 to 3, 4 if you're over 70, I think it's about not looking for magic pills. It's about just getting back to basics. One of our big comms this year, communication messages, will be all about fibre and actually going back to basic messages around fibre and why it's so important, because we know people are having gut problems. We know a lot of people are constipated. They're not getting enough fibre in their diet just to keep that healthy thing happening every day, or they're not drinking enough fluid, they're not keeping hydrated enough. Drink water, Enjoy wine and beer in moderation though. I think tonight's going to be big. Rethink that 5th drink or something, it's one standard drink. It's one standard, 1 to 2 standard drinks. Anyway, I just thought I'd get that last little...
You know where to target them, don't you?
Yeah, I was told.
All right. Well, thank you, Sarah. That was wonderful. Certainly got a lot of ideas floating around there. So we'll put our hands together for Sarah.